Picture a cold February morning in 1587. The air, heavy with frost and foreboding. Inside the stark stone walls of Fothering Castle, a woman kneels, her breath visible in the chill, her heart pounding with a courage that defies the scaffold before her. Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, once a radiant monarch crowned in infancy, now faces the executioner's axe. Her life, a tapestry of ambition, betrayal, and relentless power struggles, is about to end in a single, brutal stroke. But this is not just the story of a queen's death. It's the story of how absolute power, wielded without mercy, can shatter a human soul, and how one woman's final moments expose the fragility of those who claim to control her. How did it come to this? What forces conspired to bring Mary to this block, and what truths about power, faith, and human endurance does her tragedy reveal? Let's step into the shadows of history, where the air grows thick with intrigue, and uncover the execution that broke Mary Queen of Scots. Mary's story begins not with her end, but with her beginning a life marked by the weight of a crown she could barely comprehend. Born in December 1542, she was just 6 days old when her father, King James V of Scotland, died, leaving her the throne. Imagine it, a tiny infant, swaddled in furs, her cries echoing through Linlithgow Palace, already burdened with the hopes and fears of a nation. Scotland was a land of rugged clans and warring nobles, a kingdom caught between the ambitions of England and France. Mary's mother, Mary of Guise, a French noblewoman, shielded her daughter from the chaos, but even she could not protect her from the world's gaze. By the age of 5, Mary was betrothed to the French Dauphin, Francis, and shipped across the sea to the opulent court of France. Can you feel the weight of that journey? A child, barely old enough to understand her own name, thrust into a foreign land where every smile hid a calculation. In France, Mary bloomed. She was tall, with auburn hair and eyes that seemed to hold both fire and sorrow. Educated in poetry, music, and politics, she charmed the Valois court with her wit and grace. But beneath the silks and jewels, she was a pawn in a grander game. Her marriage to Francis in 1558, at the age of 15, tied Scotland to France, but it also made her a threat to England's Queen Elizabeth I. Why? Because Mary, through her grandmother Margaret Tudor, had a claim to the English throne, a claim that, to Catholic Europe, was stronger than that of Elizabeth, the Protestant Virgin Queen. Here's where the seeds of tragedy take root. Mary's very existence challenged Elizabeth's legitimacy. To some, Mary was the rightful Queen of England, a Catholic beacon in a land torn by religious strife. To others, she was a dangerous rival, a spark that could ignite rebellion. You see the tension building? 2 queens, 1 island, and a world that demanded one must fall. When Francis died in 1560, Mary, just 18, was a widowed queen. France no longer needed her, so she returned to Scotland, a land she barely knew. Imagine stepping into a kingdom where the nobles eye you with suspicion, where the Protestant Reformation, led by firebrand preacher John Knox, brands you a Catholic outsider. Mary tried to navigate this fractured world, marrying her cousin, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, in 1565. It was a disastrous choice. Darnley was vain, drunken, and power-hungry, a man who saw Mary's crown as his own. Their marriage unraveled quickly, marked by jealousy and violence. In 1566, Darnley orchestrated the brutal murder of Mary's secretary, David Rizzio, stabbed to death in her presence while she was pregnant. Picture the scene: Mary, 6 months with child, watching her friend bleed out on the floor, her screams drowned by the chaos. Can you feel her terror, her helplessness? This was no isolated act of cruelty, it was a warning of the brutality that power could unleash. The birth of her son, James, should have been a triumph, but it only deepened the chaos. Darnley's recklessness made him a liability, and in 1567, he was found dead, his body blown apart in an explosion at Kirkhofield. Suspicion fell on James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a man rumored to be Mary's lover. When Mary married Bothwell just months later, the Scottish nobles revolted. Was she complicit in Darnley's murder? Did she marry Bothwell out of love, coercion, or desperation? The truth is murky, but the consequences were clear. Mary was forced to abdicate, her infant son crowned as James VI, imprisoned, then freed. She fled to England in 1568, seeking refuge with her cousin Elizabeth. But refuge was a trap. Elizabeth, wary of Mary's claim to her throne, confined her to a series of castles, a gilded prisoner for 19 years. Can you imagine the slow grind of those years? Mary, once a queen who danced at French balls, now pacing stone corridors, her youth fading, her hope dimming. Let's pause on that. Image Mary, confined, her world shrinking to tapestries and letters smuggled in code. This is where the story darkens, where the machinery of absolute power begins to grind. Elizabeth's court was a nest of spies, led by men like Sir Francis Walsingham, whose obsession was to protect the Protestant queen at any cost. Mary, a Catholic symbol, was a magnet for plots. Some were real, others fabricated. Walsingham's agents watched her every move, intercepting her letters, weaving a web to ensnare her. Mary, desperate to escape, corresponded with Catholic allies, including Anthony Babington, who plotted to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne. But Babington's letters were a trap, orchestrated by Walsingham. Every word Mary wrote, every cautious endorsement of the plot, was read by her enemies. Do you feel the claustrophobia? Mary, isolated, believed she was reaching for freedom, but each pen stroke tightened the noose. In 1586, Walsingham pounced. Mary was arrested for treason, her letters presented as damning evidence. The trial was a farce. A Catholic queen, judged by Protestant nobles, her fate sealed before she entered the room. Elizabeth, torn between fear and kinship, hesitated to sign the death warrant. To execute a fellow queen was to shatter the divine aura of monarchy itself. But fear won. On February 7, 1587, Elizabeth signed the order, and Mary was told she would die the next day. Imagine that moment, a woman who had ruled 2 kingdoms, now facing the axe, given mere hours to prepare. What does that do to a soul? Does it break, or does it rise? The morning of February 8, 1587, dawned gray and bitter. Mary rose early, dressing with deliberate care. She chose a black velvet gown, its somber elegance a nod to her royal dignity, but beneath it, a crimson petticoat, a bold, defiant symbol of martyrdom. Her auburn hair was covered by a white veil, her rosary at her waist. She walked to the great hall of Fotheringay, where a scaffold draped in black awaited. The room was crowded, nobles, guards, and witnesses, their breaths mingling in the cold. Mary ascended the scaffold with steady steps, her face pale but composed. Can you see her? A woman stripped of her crown, her freedom, yet clinging to a quiet strength that unnerved those who watched. The execution was not the clean, dignified affair of legend. It was a clumsy, brutal spectacle. Mary knelt, praying in Latin, her voice steady as she commended her soul to God. The executioner, a man named Bull, was nervous, his hands unsteady. When he swung the axe, the first blow missed her neck, striking the back of her head. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mary, still conscious, murmured, "Sweet Jesus." The second blow bit into her neck but did not sever it. Blood sprayed, staining the scaffold, as Bull hacked again, finally separating her head from her body. But the horror didn't end there. When Bull lifted her head by the hair, her veil fell, revealing a wig. Her real hair, gray and cropped, betrayed the toll of her captivity. Her lips, witnesses swore, moved 4 minutes after, as if whispering a final prayer. Even her dog, hidden beneath her skirts, emerged, trembling, and refused to leave her side. Can you feel the weight of that scene, the cruelty, the indignity, the raw human cost of power's verdict? Mary's execution was more than a death, it was a statement. Elizabeth's advisors wanted to crush the Catholic threat, to prove that no one, not even a queen, was above their law. But in killing Mary, they created a martyr. Across Europe, Catholics mourned her, her story fueling rebellion and resentment. Elizabeth, haunted by the act, claimed she never intended the warrant to be carried out, blaming her secretaries. But the truth was colder. Mary's death was the price of Elizabeth's security, a sacrifice to the altar of absolute power. Yet, what did it cost? Not just Mary's life, but the illusion of invincibility that monarchs clung to. If a queen could die like a common traitor, what did that say about the divine right of kings? Let's linger on Mary's final moments, because they hold a mirror to the human condition. She faced death with a courage that defied her tormentors, but she was not a saint. She was flawed, ambitious, at times reckless, a woman who made choices that invited disaster, yet her punishment was disproportionate, a testament to how power, when unchecked, distorts justice into vengeance. Her execution exposed the fragility of those who wielded it. Elizabeth Walsingham, the nobles, they feared Mary, not because she was strong, but because she represented what they could not control: faith, lineage, the will to endure. In her death, Mary became more than a queen. She became a symbol of resistance, of the human spirit's refusal to be broken. Let's step back into the great hall of Fotheringay, where the echo of the axe still lingers, where the air is thick with the scent of blood and fear. Mary's lifeless body lies on the scaffold, her crimson petticoat a stark contrast to the black drapes, her loyal dog whimpering at her side. The witnesses, a mix of hardened nobles and trembling servants, stand frozen, their faces a gallery of shock, guilt, and grim satisfaction. But what did this moment mean to those who watched? What ripples did it send through the lives of those who orchestrated it, and through the courts of Europe that gasped at the news? Mary's death was not just the end of a queen, it was a fracture in the soul of a continent, a moment that exposed the raw, unyielding hunger of power and the human cost of its pursuit. Let's walk through the aftermath, through the eyes of those who stood in the shadows, and ask, what does it mean to break a queen, and what does it cost those who hold the axe? Consider Jane Kennedy, one of Mary's devoted ladies-in-waiting, who stood trembling as her mistress knelt. Jane had served Mary for years, through the long captivity, sewing her gowns, reading her letters, brushing her hair by candlelight. To Jane, Mary was not just a queen, but a woman who laughed, who wept, who clung to hope even as the walls closed in. In the hours before the execution, Jane helped Mary dress, her fingers shaking as she fastened the crimson petticoat. "It is for my faith," Mary whispered, her voice steady but her eyes searching Jane's for strength. Now, as Jane watches the axe fall, her world collapses. She stumbles forward, ignoring the guards, to cradle Mary's body, her hands stained with blood as she weeps. Can you feel her anguish? Jane's loyalty was not to a crown but to a person, and in this moment, she sees the true face of power, glory, but destruction. For Jane, the execution is a wound that will never heal, a reminder that devotion to a cause can end in betrayal by the very world it seeks to serve. Now shift your gaze to Robert Beale, the clerk who carried Elizabeth's signed warrant to fight. During Beale is a man of duty, a Protestant loyal to his queen, yet as he stands in the hall, his stomach churns. He watched Mary ascend the scaffold, with a dignity that unnerved him, her prayers in Latin a quiet rebuke to the Protestant triumph he was meant to uphold. Beale knows the warrant was a compromise, a decision Elizabeth made under pressure from men like Walsingham, who saw Mary as a serpent in England's bosom, but as the axe strikes, Beale flinches. This is not justice, he thinks, but necessity, a necessity that feels like murder. When he returns to London, he will face Elizabeth's wrath, for she will claim she never meant for the warrant to be acted upon. Beale will carry that guilt, the knowledge that he was the messenger of a death that stained a queen's hands. Do you see the irony? Absolute power demands loyalty, yet it leaves its servants to bear the weight of its sins. Across the sea, in the gilded halls of Paris, King Henry III of France receives the news of Mary's death with a mix of horror and calculation. Mary was his sister-in-law, the widow of his brother Francis, and her execution is a slap to French pride. Henry paces his chamber, his advisors whispering of war, of rallying Catholic Europe against Elizabeth. But Henry hesitates. France is fractured, torn by its own religious wars between Catholics and Huguenots. To avenge Mary risks inflaming his own kingdom, yet to do nothing is to admit weakness. Can you feel the tension in his silence? Mary's death is not just a personal loss but a political earthquake, exposing the fragility of alliances in a Europe divided by faith. Henry orders masses for Mary's soul, but his heart is heavy with the knowledge that her martyrdom will fuel the very conflicts he seeks to avoid. Power, he realizes, is a game of mirrors. Every move reflects back, distorted, unpredictable. In Scotland, Mary's son, James VI, receives the news with a carefully masked expression. He is 20, a king raised by Protestant regents, taught to see his mother as a Catholic threat. Yet she was his mother, the woman who gave him life, and now she is dead, killed by his southern neighbor, Elizabeth. James writes a letter of protest, but his words are hollow. He cannot afford to alienate England, not when his own throne is shaky, his nobles restless. Deep down, does he mourn her, or does he see her death as a step toward his own ambition, the dream of uniting Scotland and England under his rule? Imagine the conflict in his soul, a son who never knew his mother, yet carries her blood, her claim, her shadow. James's silence in the face of her execution reveals a chilling truth about power. It demands sacrifice, even of one's own kin. Mary's death frees him, but at what cost to his humanity? Let's return to Elizabeth, alone in her privy chamber at Whitehall. When the news reaches her, she is 43, her face powdered to hide the marks of smallpox, her red wig a crown of its own. She has ruled England for nearly 30 years, navigating a world that questions her legitimacy, her gender, her faith. Mary was her cousin, her Mary Queen, who, like her, bore the weight of a crown in a man's world. Yet Mary was also her rival, a threat Elizabeth could not ignore. When Walsingham presents the report of the execution, Elizabeth's reaction is volcanic. She weeps, she rages, she banishes her secretaries, claiming she never meant for Mary to die. Is it genuine, or is it theater, a performance to distance herself from the blood on her hands? Picture her pacing, her gown sweeping the floor, her mind racing. Elizabeth knows what this act means. She has crossed a line, shattered the sanctity of monarchy. If a queen can be executed, what protects her own neck? The weight of absolute power, she realizes, is not just in ruling, but in living with the choices it demands. The execution's aftermath is a tapestry of grief, ambition, and fear, woven through the lives of those it touched. In Fotheringhay, Mary's servants are interrogated, their loyalty to a dead queen now a mark of suspicion. Jane Kennedy is sent back to Scotland, her life forever altered, her dreams haunted by the scaffold. In London, Walsingham tightens his spy network, fearing Catholic reprisals, his health crumbling under the strain of his own ruthlessness. In Rome, Pope Sixtus V condemns Elizabeth as a heretic, calling for a crusade, but his words are drowned by the practicalities of a divided Christendom. Mary's death does not unite Catholic Europe, it fractures it further, each nation weighing its own interests against the cost of vengeance. Do you see the paradox? Power seeks control, yet its actions so chaos, like a stone thrown into a still pond, its ripples unending. Let's step beyond the courts, to the ordinary people who heard of Mary's death. In Edinburgh's taverns, men whisper of their lost queen, some cursing Elizabeth, others shrugging their lives too hard to care for distant tragedies. In London's markets, pamphlets circulate, some painting Mary as a traitor, others as a saint. The common folk, Catholic and Protestant alike, feel the execution's shadow, a reminder that even queens are mortal, that power's blade spares no one. Imagine a weaver in York, pausing at her loom, wondering if the world is truly safer now, or if the blood of a queen will bring God's wrath. Her fear is not abstract, it's the fear of a world where order frays, where the divine right of kings is just another lie. Mary's execution, for these people, is not history, it's a warning, a crack in the foundation of their reality. Now, let's delve deeper into the psychological scars left by this act. Mary's death was not just a physical end, but a psychological unraveling for those who witnessed it. The executioner, Bull, is said to have trembled for days, his dreams plagued by the memory of his clumsy blows. He was no villain, just a man paid to do a grim task, yet the weight of killing a queen clings to him like damp rot. The witnesses, too, carry scars, nobles who boasted of their loyalty to Elizabeth, yet flinch at night, haunted by Mary's calm gaze. Even Walsingham, the architect of her downfall, is not immune. His letters reveal a man obsessed with security, yet tormented by the knowledge that every victory breeds new enemies. Power, he learns, is a poison that seeps into the mind, turning trust into suspicion, triumph into dread. For Elizabeth, the psychological toll is profound. Mary's death marks a turning point, a moment when her reign begins to feel like a siege. She grows more isolated, her court a maze of flattery and betrayal. The Spanish Armada, launched a year later in 1588, is fueled in part by outrage over Mary's execution. And though Elizabeth triumphs, the victory is hollow. She spends her later years haunted by the cousin she could not save or destroy without cost. Can you feel her loneliness? A queen who won her throne, yet lost her peace, her heart a battlefield where duty wars with regret. Mary's execution did not just break her, it broke Elizabeth, too, in ways that history rarely acknowledges. As we stand in the aftermath, let's ask, what does Mary's tragedy teach us? Her life was a collision of faith, ambition, and power, a reminder that human beings, even queens, are fragile, flawed, and capable of extraordinary resilience. Her execution exposed the lie of absolute power, that it brings security, that it elevates those who wield it. Instead, it dehumanizes, turning rulers into executioners, subjects into pawns, and loyalty into betrayal. Mary's final moments, her courage in the face of death, were a defiance of that dehumanization, a claim to her own humanity, even as the axe fell. She was not a saint, nor a villain, but a woman who faced the worst of what power could do and refused to let it define her. Her story resonates because it is our story too. We live in a world where power still shapes lives, where decisions made in distant rooms ripple into our homes, our hearts. Mary's execution asks us to look at the cost not just of the axe, but of the choices that lead to it, who pays for the ambitions of the powerful, who bears the scars of their victories. And what does it mean to endure, to hold on to hope, even when the world demands your surrender? Mary's death was a breaking, but it was also a revelation, a mirror held up to history, showing us the beauty and brutality of what it means to be human.